What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. The time has come. It's finally here. We have the Arctic Leopard XE Pro S in our hands, and today we're going to talk about some of the things that we've noticed and what you can expect when you get this bike built out of the box. So if you've been waiting for this bike like we have, it is nice to finally have it in our hands and be able to sit here and talk to you about it. There are some things about this bike that may be a little bit less attractive than what you had originally thought. For me, I think this is a perfect bike that is perfect competition for the E-Ride 3.0. And the reason that I say that is both of these bikes are similar in power. The 3.0 has 16 kilowatts of peak power and the XE Pro S comes in at 20 kilowatts of peak power. The reason I'm pinning these two bikes up against each other is simply because of the way the tires come from the factory. That tells me some R&D was probably done on the E-Ride 3.0 prior to releasing this bike and giving us a more Shinko 241 style front and rear tire, which by no means is my favorite tire whatsoever. This is definitely more of a dual sport tire versus a street hard pack trail hybrid like comes on the E-Ride 3.0, but all in, I think this is a direct competitor for that bike. And it's definitely interesting to shake up the market a little bit and to see what's coming out and what's going to be new and what we can expect from companies as they continue to produce bikes. Now, as promised, this bike does come with a 72 volt 55 amp hour battery along with the upgraded KKE forks and shock. These are definitely in line and comparable with the E-Ride factory components that come on that bike, but the XE Pro S definitely stepped out to really make a mark because it is coming with a lot of upgraded components that people generally change right away. And for the price point of $53.99 versus the price point of the $57.99 for the E-Ride 3.0, you're definitely getting a better value bike out of the Arctic Leopard XE Pro S. Now, previously, before this video was made about a week ago, the prices of the E-Ride Pros were much lower than they are right now. And I know you can pick up these Arctic Leopards for $53.99. We have them on our site for that price. But I think it is a really good comparison to the 3.0 and coming in at a cheaper price point for what I would consider to have even as good or maybe slightly better components, definitely makes a case of why you should take a look at this bike versus the 3.0 right now, given the massive price difference. Now, another thing that you get with the XE Pro S is a direct drive powertrain. So it's not that I've ever had issues with belts breaking. I know a lot of people have had those issues, and direct drive for me is just one less piece or one less component that has the ability to fail. And with a direct drive drivetrain, you're not dealing with a belt driven motor. You are getting your power directly from the motor to the rear wheel with no additional mechanism in between the two. So for me, it just sounds like that is a better approach. That's what comes on the Stark Varg. That's what comes on big power bikes. And in my opinion, for this small frame, a 20 kilowatt power bike, having a direct drive is absolutely the sweet spot for a bike of this size. Now, another thing that might be kind of a small deal to you, but to me, I think was a really smart move from Arctic Leopard. They put plastic around a lot of the frame components that you would otherwise scratch with your boots. And although that may seem like a small detail, replacing a piece of plastic or repainting your frame or repowder coating your frame, I think it's a pretty obvious choice. And to have plastic covering the primary and the most vulnerable parts of your frame is a big deal. It may seem like a small thing in the beginning, but after you ride your bike for miles and miles and miles, you will see a lot of frame wear, and it's just nice to have a piece of plastic covering it so you don't have to worry about any issues and you don't have to see those ugly scuff marks on your brand new bike. Another thing that is a big thumbs up for Arctic Leopard is the fact that you get aluminum foot pegs directly from the factory. You do not have to source new foot pegs immediately. I know that may seem like a small deal, but every single bike we build, every single customer bike we sell, the suggestion is always foot pegs first, because I don't think the foot pegs that come on these bikes factory generally are very good. Not having to switch them and having an aluminum foot peg with a good surface to stand on, whether in boots or shoes, is something that could have been done and can be done by everybody. And even though it's a small component, a steel foot peg versus an aluminum foot peg is a huge weight difference. We're not talking about much, but if weight reduction is something that you're considering or something that you're trying to achieve, immediately the foot peg's got to go. So that is a big plus for this bike in that department. So one of the weird parts about the bike, if you want to call it that, is the fact that you don't need a key. You only need a key to open up your battery slot. Outside of that, you are using an RFD card, I believe is what it's called, and you hold the left M button on your left hand control. You hold it for 4 seconds, it turns the bike on, it asks for a code. You don't need a code, you just need to slide one of your keys across that interface and it automatically unlocks the bike. It's different to get used to, but lost keys are a huge pain in the butt. And if you lose both sets of your keys for your E-moto, then you're gonna be looking at some time to get a new set, or you're gonna have to order a new ignition. It's just a whole process that now you can avoid. Obviously, you could still lose the little RFD card. I don't even know if that's exactly what it's called, but you can still get into the bike with a 4-digit code. So that really makes things nice. You don't have to worry about your keys, but you do need them to get into the battery slot in order to take your battery out or to change a controller if you wanted to do any of those things. So let's talk about a few things that I don't like, and they're very small, minor details. Starting up front with the handlebars. The handlebars are 31.5 inches wide. A traditional Warp 9 handlebar is 33 inches. So you have an 1.5 inches narrower handlebar. And the second I got on the bike, I could notice it. You're probably going to notice it too. I'm not exactly sure why that is, why they made that decision or why they did that. However, it does make the bike feel smaller with your hands in a more narrow position. And generally, if your hands are in a more narrow position, it's harder to get your elbows up. If they're more out wide, you kind of have that V shape, and when you're holding those handlebars, so your elbows naturally want to come up into a good riding position. So it's a small detail, but for people who ride these bikes really hard, having a good hand position is important. So immediately the first thing that we're going to do before we start taking this bike on any serious trails is we're going to change the handlebars. Not because they're of poor quality, I'm just not a fan of a really narrow position for my hands. While we're talking about the handlebars, let's talk about the controls. I think the controls are just really good for what you get. I have seen many E-motos in the past, more than one, not many, that the controls just feel cheap and they don't feel like a quality product. I will say the XE Pro S does feel like a quality finish on the handlebars. So that in itself is definitely something to be considered. It's definitely no better or worse than the E-Ride 3.0, but I'm just saying, like, that is something that you can tell when you sit on the E-moto. If the controls feel bad, it's an immediate bad impression for us and for me, because that makes me feel like if you're skimping on the thing that everyone's touching and feeling and seeing from the very beginning, what else could possibly be skimped on? And as these prices continue to increase with tariffs, like, we want to make sure that we are getting the best products possible. So they definitely get the stamp of approval from the control aspect that go on the handlebars. Issue number 2 that I'm not a huge fan of is the way you have to take the seat off. It's not controlled by a key like most bikes are controlled by a key to either open the lid or take the seat off. In some little E-motos, like all the E-Ride products, you basically can't take the seat off at all. You have to take the whole subframe off the bike in order to get that seat off. Well, this does allow you to get the seat off, but it has very similar to like a Yamaha style seat where it has a nut that you twist off. The problem with that is when I was putting that seat on and trying to get everything aligned, I was able to get the seat in without stripping the bolt, but that is definitely something that's going to happen, and that's probably going to happen more often than not, where you're trying to get your seat on, you get that little screw in at the wrong angle, and before you know it, you're twisting it closed and you've cross-threaded that bolt. It's not a huge deal to tap and die it. It's not something that you can't overcome. It's just one of those little details that I think is going to cause problems for a lot of people. And the way the seat is, it's not the most comfortable seat that I've ever sat on, that's for sure. And I feel like those foot pegs are really raised up. So another thing that we always talk about here is lowering those foot pegs down, giving yourself a better center of gravity on the bike. Now, with these foot pegs, I've tested the Warp 9 drop pegs. They do not fit this bike frame, so I don't know if anybody will ever even develop something like that. That's something I'm considering taking on myself. However, you do feel like your knees are way up on the bike, so it feels like a smaller bike, which means when it feels like a smaller bike and it has big power, I start to question if it's really my thing, because big power, small frame bikes aren't my thing. I prefer big power, big bikes, but that's a personal preference. So depending upon your height, I'm only 5'10". My legs are definitely a little bit longer than my torso. They seem to, so that definitely takes into account, but my knees sit really high up on the plastics, and it doesn't have the most comfortable riding position right out of the box. If that's something you can overcome, by all means, feel free to do that, but I'm just letting you know how I feel on the bike based on all the E-motos that I've ridden. So now what I'm gonna do is get a little bit nitpicky, only because I think it's good information for you to have. Whether you want it or not is besides the point. The nitpicky part is the kickstand is too short. Like, the bike really leans over on its kickstand. I know it sounds silly, maybe stupid, but it just does. It really has an aggressive lean when you put the kickstand down. If that kickstand was an inch taller, you wouldn't have that problem. I have it propped up on a rock right now, and just to get it to like a more level position, definitely a small item and a small subject, but it's something that's, I'm being nitpicky, that's what I said. Another part that I'm being nitpicky about is the screen. The screen doesn't fit the bars. The screen mount that you screw together to fit to the bars doesn't fit very well. So it kind of moves. The screen moves a lot, and I'm not a fan of that whatsoever when you're riding and that screen is kind of bouncing back and forth. It's not very loose. I don't think that's a good representation. However, it is loose enough that it can move on its own, and I'm not a fan of that. One big plus for this is, unlike the E-Ride Pros, where your screen, you have to get an adapter essentially for your screen to fit a direct bar mount from Warp 9, you don't need to do that on this bike. Because that screen is, the feet on the screen that connect to the handlebars is already so wide, you don't need to worry about getting an adapter to fit this bike. So we are gonna throw on Warp 9 bars and a Warp 9 bar mount right away. I already have it in the shop. I just have not put it on yet, but that will be the first thing we change to this bike before we actually do any aggressive riding. So let's talk briefly about power modes. You have 4 power modes on this bike. I forget exactly what they're called, but one of them's Tour. The other one is like OTC. They're kind of funky names. I really don't know what the abbreviations stand for, but the power delivery on the XE Pro S, the throttle delivery and the throttle curve directly from the factory, is the absolute best I have ever ridden out of any E-moto. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's almost as good as the throttle response and delivery on my Stark Varg. So that is something to be said. Having a smooth throttle that just doesn't throw you off the bike, it rolls on nice and easy. I was riding this thing around the neighborhood the other night, and I was over the moon at how good the throttle was. I could not stop talking about how good that throttle rolls on. So that is a very small detail, and maybe a lot of people wouldn't notice that, but I have ridden so many of these bikes, and now riding my Stark Varg on a regular basis, I am used to a very smooth throttle, and these E-motos are known for having a very jumpy, twitchy throttle. This bike does not have any of that. So Arctic Leopard, you absolutely crushed the throttle game, and I am super stoked to really take this thing out and see what it can do. So before we wrap this up, I want to throw out one more nitpicky comment. It would not stop me from buying the bike because I'm going to switch tires on this no matter what anyways. But you have a 70, 90, 19 up front, but the depth and the height of the tread is so small that it almost, even though you have an 18 in the rear and a 19-inch tire and wheel in the front, it still looks like the bike sits a little stink bug. It still looks like the front tire is too small for the bike. We have already ordered a new Pivotrax tire. It should be here tomorrow. We will switch that over and put a new tire on it. And that'll also give us a chance to see what kind of tubes come in this, because I also think that comes into play. Is it a really thin tube, a crappy tube, or is it a good, nice, heavy-duty tube? I don't know. I haven't dug into it. But having those offset tires. I appreciate the factories and all of them coming with an 18-19 setup. However, if you're gonna go 18-19 setup, at least put a front tire on the bike that is good for the bike. It's still very, very narrow. And I can tell you right now, the way we ride in Southern Arizona, the trails that we go on, I would be scared of getting a puncture on a sharp rock because there's just not much sidewall to the tire whatsoever. But other than those few items, I am extremely impressed with the way that Arctic Leopard brought this bike to market. I think 20 kilowatts of power that you can see on the display as you're riding and you're twisting the throttle, it tells you how many kilowatts of power you are using in that exact moment. It's instantaneous. That is another detail that a lot of people don't do, that you only get in aftermarket controller setups. That really does change the game to know exactly what type of power you're pushing at what point in the throttle. And all of those little things add up. So for me, this bike is going to be an absolute blast. And for the price point of $53.99 versus its competition up at $57.99, I think you're getting one heck of a bike for the value or for the money. And it's something that you should consider if you're in the E-moto market or the small E-moto market. This bike definitely gets a stamp of approval, and I'm really stoked to get it out on the trail. So next time you see this bike, it'll have a few changes made, preference changes that I like for the way that I like to ride, and then I'm going to rip this thing through the desert and we're going to see how it performs. So stay tuned for that. And if you haven't, we will leave links. I kind of messed that up, but I will leave links for everything that we talked about today in the description. And if you have not subscribed, that's what I was going to say, please feel free to subscribe, share this information with somebody. I will also leave our podcast that we just recently did last week in the description for you to take a listen to on your drive to work. If you just want to consume more E-moto content, but you don't want to sit at your computer to do it, that's a great way to help and support us as well. So I will see you guys on the next one.